Hello and welcome to the BTO Podcast. I'm Greg, one of the BTO's Youth Advisory Panel members, and I'm here in a socially distanced recording studio just outside Cambridge with new Chief Executive Officer of BTO, Juliet Vickery, and outgoing Chief Exec, Andy Clements. Juliet, do you want to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks very much, Greg, and great to be here. So my name's Juliet Vickery. I am delighted to be taking over as the new CEO of the British Trust for Ornithology. So I spent the last 11 years working for the RSPB, another wonderful organisation, leading a team of researchers working in international conservation issues. And before that, I actually worked for the BTO leading their work on farmland birds and farmland bird conservation. So really fantastic to be back.
And Andy, tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you, Greg. I'm Andy Clements. I'm the outgoing Chief Executive of BTO. I've been here 13 years, just over 13 years actually. And of course, when I took on this role, I used to say to people that it was the dream job for somebody who has had a career in conservation. I still think that now. I'm sad to be leaving, but it's definitely time for a new challenge for me, but also new challenges for the BTO. And I'm really confident that Juliet will be able to lead the BTO in wonderful, new and exciting directions.
Great, and thank you both for talking to me. So today we're going to talk to Juliet and Andy about what they've been up to before and what's coming next for the BTO. We, as a youth advisory panel, have been working with BTO during 2020, and one of the things we've done together as a group of 10 young people is develop a few questions that we want to ask Juliet and Andy. We are going to be looking back at Andy's time with the BTO and also looking forward to what Juliet will bring to the role of Chief Executive in the future. Let's start by getting to know you both a little bit better. Can you tell me how you both got into birding and science? Maybe Andy, you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks very much, Greg. I've always been a birder ever since I was 7 years old and noticing birds in the garden. But actually, my career has involved both science. So I was trained as a scientist. I did a PhD and a postdoc. And then I always wanted to work in conservation. So following my academic period, I then worked for the government's Nature Conservation Agency for 25 years. And of course, the job at the BTO arose. I applied for it and I was really eager to get it because it brought together both those elements of science and conservation. And of course, it was about birds, which was my passion.
And Juliet, what about yourself?
So, like Andy, I was always fascinated by the natural world as a child and also very interested in conservation. But my sort of move into the birding world, I think, was just a stroke of fantastic luck, really. So as an undergraduate at Oxford, I chose an undergraduate project on swifts nesting in the University Museum Tower. I had a supervisor who was a wonderful scientist and ornithologist, Chris Perrins. And that project taught me two things, really. The first was how, in this case, quite simple data can reveal some really fascinating patterns about the world around us. And the second was how closely linked these birds were to their environment. So the study was about essentially egg laying and weather. And that led me to become very intrigued by the way in which birds provide potentially great indicators of the world around them. And I went on from that to do a PhD also with Chris Perrins on waterway birds in southwest Scotland, studying mainly dippers, which remain my absolute favourite bird to this day, and learning a lot about my field skills and birds actually from BTO volunteers, so ringers who helped me catch these birds on the waterways, and waterway bird surveyors who basically showed me their patch and helped me to study the breeding of these species. And the rest is history. That was me hooked on birds, really.
Great, thank you very much. Andy, so you've been at the helm of BTO for 13 years. I wondered if you could tell us a bit about how it feels to leave after all that time. What will you miss and what's been your highlights?
Thanks very much, Greg. Yeah, I might get emotional when I'm talking about this, of course, because, apart from anything else, I will be sad to leave the BTO. It's been an extraordinary period. Working in conservation and the environment, one meets daily passionate and committed staff. And that has enabled me for 40 years to get out of bed every morning with excitement about the job and the work ahead. And I think it's that ability to work with wonderful people in the organisation. And as Juliet just said, not only the staff inside our organisation, but the trustees who give their time voluntarily, and most of all, the 50,000 volunteer birdwatchers with whom the BTO, we're nothing without those people. And their commitment, their abilities, their skills, and their willingness to be part of the endeavour together with our professional scientists is a really extraordinary thing and quite a unique aspect of our organisation, not just in the UK, but globally. One of the things I do is I teach annually at the Masters in Conservation Leadership with the Cambridge Conservation Initiative. We're a partner in that collaboration. And the international students that come to that master's course every year, 20 of them from around the globe, they are always astonished at the skill and level of endeavour we have from volunteer bird watchers and volunteer wildlife watchers in the UK. And for the BTO to be able to harness that potential is a truly wonderful thing.
Well, with that in mind, Juliet, how do you feel about taking over from Andy over the next couple of weeks?
Gosh, yes. Well, lots of emotions going on, really. So, I mean, hugely excited, first of all. I mean, it's a fantastic opportunity and so very excited about it. I'd be lying if I didn't say I was also a little bit daunted by it. Andy's a very tough act to follow. But I think the overwhelming sense is one of huge privilege, really. So to have been trusted with a position in an organisation that has, almost a 90-year history of doing amazing things, this tremendous partnership between professional and citizen scientists, which has stood the test of time, and which, single-handedly allows us to understand the state of our nature across Britain. I mean, that's amazing. So the chance to be, I think, as I've already said, part of working with staff, with members, with trustees to shape the next phase of the BTO's future is a huge privilege and one that I feel deeply honoured to have been trusted with.
That's great to hear. Thank you both. And it's really exciting that we've got two people with such a passion for the organisation's purpose, but also just for birding in themselves. I'm sure we'll hear some more of your stories, Andy. So let's take a moment to just maybe look back, Andy, on some of the things you've been involved with while you've been Chief Executive at BTO. What's the most exciting project that you think you've managed to get off the ground and get your teeth into while you've been at the top of the organisation?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I find these sorts of questions quite difficult in terms of speaking from my own perspective, because above all else, what I have tried to achieve and what I feel we have achieved is to put a team together that delivers amazing results, both outcomes for biodiversity, but also good results for the organisation and its future. Clearly, things like the membership rising by 50% in the last decade is an important achievement for the organisation. In the early few years, I was very fortunate to arrive when the recording of data for the BTO's new atlas of breeding and wintering birds was just taking shape. So I inherited that project, really. All the hard work, or much of the hard work, had already been done by others. And the leadership by Professor Rob Fuller at the time, who was one of the directors of science, and Dawn Barmer, who is still with us and leading the regional network and surveys work at the BTO. Their leadership of that Atlas project was formidable. And it was a wonderful time to arrive. So as I say, my first year was 2007, and that was also the first year of data collection by all the volunteers for the Atlas. And it was an interesting Atlas in the sense that it was the first time we'd done both summer and wintering birds at the same time. So when the book was published in 2013, we ran an event at the Royal Society in London, And it was just a tremendous event, and it really gave me the sense of the support we had from a wide range of policymakers, decision makers, volunteers, bird watchers, other NGOs in the sector who were relying on that data. And I think one of the things it taught me was that I will always say that BTO is a conservation organisation, and I know others have different views. But the reason I say that is because much of conservation couldn't achieve what it does achieve without the underpinning data and evidence that is provided by BTO and fundamentally provided by the volunteers who gather all the data. So the launch of that atlas and the fact that we published that book ourselves, we did look at other publishers who produce beautiful products, but we decided to go it alone. And that was a risk, but it was a really good risk to take. And it has driven our publishing capability ever since. And some of the things that BTO has produced in terms of publications have really assisted our communications with a much wider audience. And then as I think about the last few years at the BTO, one of the most exciting things, and you'll be pleased to hear this, Greg, I'm sure, is our engagement with the young birders and the young people of today who, let's face it, are going to be the leaders of the future. We feel very privileged at the BTO that we have a youth advisory panel of which you're a member, with 10 young people passionate about the environment, passionate about the role of science and evidence and data in taking forward initiatives in favour of nature as recovery for the future. And the work that our team at the BTO, including Faye, have led with young people, I think has been transformational for the organisation. One of the things that has always been at the front of my mind is while we need to appeal to a broader audience, we mustn't forget the people at the centre of the organisation that have been our loyal supporters, some of them for 40 or even 50 years. And what's been really gratifying is when we've chosen to feature young people and work with young people, we've had lots of messages from our core supporters that this is an amazing thing to be doing and they're really proud of the organisation for doing it. So somehow or other, the BTO seems to have pulled off a trick of keeping our loyal supporters happy and engaging a new and broader audience. There's still much more to do, but we're on the way.
Yeah, we're definitely on the way. Thank you, Andy. And I know we're working on expanding our work with young people and connecting more young people across the country with BTO's existing networks of staff and regional representatives. So hopefully that will continue into the future. Andy, tell us a bit more about any of your favourite memories from your time as BTO Chief Executive.
This is a really great question because, we've talked about projects that have been successful and that kind of thing, but the memories are always going to be about the people. And one of the nice things, and we won't be doing it this year, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, is the annual conference that we have at Swanwick. And there we meet 400 members of the BTO and we have a very good time. There's a conference and lots of socialising. And one of my favourite memories from that is that late into the night, and it's always late into the night, round about midnight, you take your jacket off, you sit down on the sofas with a group of BTO staff. Out comes the wine and the whiskey and the cheese and the crackers. And sometimes we're there till 4 o'clock in the morning, just shooting the breeze together. And, for me, that's really important because engaging with staff in an informal way, it's a really important thing. And then the second thing is, one of the big deals for our year is when we go to the bird fair. Once again, this year we haven't been able to do that. But what I've really liked about the bird fair is working on the stand with BTO staff, it's an opportunity for volunteers to come and sit down and chat, and members and supporters to sit down and chat with me as the Chief Executive, just like any other member of staff. And I've loved those times. It's been exciting meeting all sorts of people, sitting down with Chris Packham as the president, then with Frank Gardner as the president. Previous people that have supported BTO, like Barbara Young, coming and sitting on the stand and chatting to staff with me just as much as with any other member of staff. Those are the kind of things I'm going to miss.
So, Andy, you've spoken a bit about those people you've met during your time as Chief Executive at Swanwick and at events like Bird Fair. I'm sure some of them are wondering what's next for you. So, do you have plans?
Yeah. It's a big question, isn't it, when you leave an organisation like this, having been in the leadership role. And, for me, it is retirement in a way. But I have a fear, of being that old guy walking down the street in their slippers to collect the newspaper every day. And somehow or other, I don't think that's quite me. And for one thing, I don't think I've finished trying to make a contribution to conservation. As many people know, I have a board position with Natural England, which lasts for another couple of years. And as a non-executive there, I chair their science committee and I chair the Partnership for National Nature Reserves. And those are two very rewarding aspects of that role. I won't take another full-time role, as far as I can tell at the moment anyway, but I will wish to carry on contributing as I can to ensuring the recovery of nature, for which I remain passionate about.
Great, and I'm sure you'll stay in touch with the BTO and remain involved in birding yourself.
Yeah, I will. I am a birder first and foremost. Those who know me will know that I'm a kind of all sorts of birder. So I do various surveys for the BTO. I have my own breeding bird survey squares. I did atlas work, and of course I use BirdTrack. BirdTrack is our app on the phone for recording all bird observations and making those bird observations available as a body of scientific data. And it's a really nice thing for a birder to be able to do, is record those lists. I do that more or less daily, actually. Find a bit of time. We've just done a walk around Milton Country Park before coming into this studio. I did a BirdTrack list while we were walking along and talking. So I will remain in contact with BTO and follow its fortunes really closely. And I think Juliet and I have a handover over the next few weeks, and I'm sure we'll do a lot of talking about the future of BTO too.
Great, thank you very much. I'm sure we haven't seen the last of you yet. Juliet, coming to you now. Tell me about a project that maybe you're looking forward to being involved with, or maybe an idea that you have that you want to get off the ground.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I mean, there are lots, there always are, and then you obviously have to prioritise. But I mean, firstly, it would be fantastic to build on so much that Andy, the senior leadership team, trustees and staff, and have already put in place. There are lots of fabulous initiatives, and certainly for me, I've always been very committed to increasing the diversity, inclusiveness, and equality of the birding world, if you like. So I'm currently president of the British Ornithologists Union, and we've worked quite hard to make everything that we do there as open and inclusive as possible. The BTO have already done some wonderful things around this too. So I think broadening our reach, finding ways to appeal to everyone, anywhere, whatever their age, socioeconomic background, all of those things. That's something I feel very committed to and very passionate about. And I'm very much looking forward to building on the work the BTO has already done in that direction. And the second, so it's not a specific project, obviously, this is day one, so, but a more general thing, which is, again, harkening back to things that Andy's already said around the impact of BTO work. So I think the BTO already has huge impact, but it remains maybe a little bit of a well-kept secret. I think, just making that work better known, us all speaking up about it, being proud about being part of it, So claiming that impact that we already have and looking to ways to improve it and increase it. So that might be, for example, thinking about issues, in the near future that we should be galvanizing our data around, so we're ready to answer questions when they're needed. It may just be different ways of articulating the work we're doing, forming different relationships with decision makers or other partners, but just thinking about how we really make this fantastic data that the BTO is a steward of more available and more impactful in terms particularly of environmental decision making. And of course, next year it's going to be a huge year for the environment, and we need to be centre stage in terms of the data that we deliver for that. So I think, connecting more people and having a bigger impact are the general sort of projects I'd love to help find ways for the BTO to do.
And do you think there's anyone in particular or any group that we need to connect with better as an organisation, or connect the volunteers with?
Well, I think, as Andy said, the next generation, your generation, are clearly extraordinarily important to the future of BTO work, and forging links between the younger generation and the older generation, learning from each other. I think that's really important. I have a daughter at university, and I'm very aware that I'm quite out of touch. There are new ways of doing things. I need to learn how to do that. So I think that's one thing. And of course, many of the underrepresented groups, we've learnt in COVID how unequal access to nature is across the UK, and thinking hard about how we make nature more accessible, particularly to people in urban areas, and connecting in different ways in that sense, I think, is also really important.
Great. Yeah, I think we've as a youth advisory panel have definitely been thinking about those kinds of issues as well, exacerbated by the pandemic. So it's good to hear that will be a focus. Andy, do you have anything to add about that, the importance of that work?
Yeah, what I want to come back on is some of the things that Juliet's just said. One of the most exciting aspects of handing the baton to Juliet is that I really feel, with her scientific expertise and knowledge and her passion for impact, this will make a significant difference to the work of BTO in the future. We've always been an organisation that has steered a steady course down the middle of controversial issues without fear or favour. We will take on difficult controversies, and what we do with that is provide evidence that informs those issues so that they can be debated in a more balanced and inclusive way. And I know from Juliet's previous work at the BTO and her work at the RSPB that she's going to be able to deliver a real difference to the impact BTO's work has in the future.
Great. So, Andy, what lessons have you learned from leading teams and organisations like the BTO?
This is a very interesting question because while we're passionate and energetic as leaders, we need to be realistic too, that leadership can at times be very tough. As chief executive, what I've learned is that you're always in the spotlight. The buck really does stop with the chief executive. The trustees are very helpful and supportive, and BTO is very lucky to have wonderful trustees on its board that have been incredibly supportive, both to me as an individual, but also to the senior team and the organisation as a whole. But when you think about the strategy of the organisation for the future, when you reflect on being out there, leading the BTO in the community of stakeholders that we have, some of whom are our friends, some of whom come to us because they don't necessarily agree with what we want to do or the way we want to do it. And you reflect on looking after the staff. I'm responsible as the chief executive for 120 people's livelihoods, and that focuses the mind. So while it's a very exciting and energetic role and forward-looking, and we achieve a lot in leadership, we have to be realistic that it's not the easiest job in the world. And I think what I've learned is that so long as you continue to learn and you reflect on the things that you learn, it does get better and better.
And Juliet, what have you learned from previous challenges that you'll be able to bring to the BTO?
Well, I think the first thing I have to say, of course, is that I've led teams, but not organisations, and I recognise I have an awful lot to learn. So early on, As CEO, I'll be very much about listening, understanding, getting to know staff, and also trustees and members and supporters. So a lot of learning to do. The three things I think I'd like to say that I've learnt from leading teams in the past that I'm really determined to bring into this role is, first of all, the huge importance of understanding your staff and listening to your staff. So I really believe that good leaders know their staff. The second thing is being open and honest and transparent as a leader and accessible as a leader. And again, I think whilst I've only led teams, and obviously that's much more difficult when you step up to leading an organisation, the joy of the BTO is that it's, the size that does allow you to really get to know your staff. So that's the second thing. And then I think the third thing is that, of course, you have to make bold decisions sometimes, and those bold decisions are very rarely ones that everyone will welcome. So having the courage to make those decisions, knowing they're the right ones, I think is also a lesson I will carry forwards to my future with the BTO.
Great, thank you very much. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of challenges waiting for you in Andy's footsteps. Andy, let's take a few steps back to your time as Chief Executive again. And I wondered if you could tell me about, this might be a little bit of a difficult question, but one thing that you think you would have done differently.
Yeah, this is one of the difficult questions because there are lots of things I think I should have done differently. And it's a bit dull in a way, but when you're in the top leadership role at an organisation, what we've been talking about so far is the content of the work that the organisation undertakes and the results it achieves with it. But that doesn't happen by magic. That happens as a result of the organisation functioning in a proper way. And for too long, I think, at the BTO, we have done well on strategy and we've done well on the external aspects of our work. But we still have a difficulty in translating our ideas into operational achievement. And that requires a careful, completer finisher mind to get the operational processes in place in the organisation that make everybody's job easier. We're an organisation kind of on the edge. We never have quite enough cash. We have too much work. Our staff are too stressed by the amount of work they have. We don't quite have the capacity that we need. We're wonderfully well off for capability in all walks of the organisation's life. But my main kind of feeling that where I haven't achieved what I should have achieved for the organisation is that underpinning operational processes that enable everybody's working life to be easier, their work-life balance to be in good shape, and therefore their mental health and well-being. We take account of all of that, and recently we've had the arrival of superb leadership on the people side with Sian Knott, our head of people and organisational development. And it became apparent over the last couple of years with her there how much we've been trying to do that on a shoestring and not very well. And I'm really hopeful that as Juliet takes over, we have the capacity to change the nature of that aspect of our work. But I kind of wish we'd started that earlier on in my time.
Juliet, you spoke a bit about impact and how we can make sure that BTO's work really has a real-world application. What do you think you'll bring to the role of Chief Executive that will help make that happen?
Well, I think for lots of people, we come into any role really with our background, knowledge and experience, and I suppose what you might call character traits really. And so for me, I've had a very lucky and wonderful 30-odd years in conservation science, some in academia and some in NGOs. So I have, I think, a deep knowledge and understanding of the scientific process, asking the right questions, being able to gently challenge where you need to, and also of communicating that science. I'm a very passionate and keen communicator of science. I enjoy that, and I think it's hugely important. So I have a background in science and the scientific process, and also experience in communicating that. And that's the one thing I would say. And I've worked for quite a long time on this so-called science policy interface, how to make that science impactful, how to ask the right questions that policymakers or practitioners need to answer, and to communicate and build relationships with those people using that information at the end. So science and the science policy interface, I would say, is experience that I would bring to the role. And then I suppose as a sort of character trait, so I think I would be described as being an enthusiastic and energetic leader, and I absolutely intend to remain enthusiastic and energetic for the BTO cause. And I have a deep passion for birds, for the natural world, and for the value of science and understanding and conserving that. So of course, we all know that the fight is a hard one. There is lots to do, and you need to stick at it. And I'm pretty determined. I don't give up easily. And so I think what I would say I'd bring some scientific knowledge and a lot of passion and energy to the cause.
Good to hear. Thank you very much. So as a youth advisory panel, we've been thinking a lot about how to engage young people with BTO's mission, with birding and with citizen science. What do you think organisations like BTO need to do to involve and include more young people in those activities?
Yeah, very good question, inevitably from you, I suspect. And I think the short answer is that I'm not entirely sure, but I am a fundamental believer in the way in which to engage underrepresented groups, whoever they are, and I think youth are, certainly in much of the BTO's work at the moment, is to talk to those groups, to understand their perspective, to recognise that from my position I probably won't understand it. What are the barriers to getting involved? How do we overcome those barriers? How to become more inclusive, more relevant, more exciting to the youth group in this case. So I think I'm almost going to throw the question back to you and say, that's why we have a youth advisory panel. I'm really looking forward to seeing the strategy that you've come up with, hearing about your ideas, and then talking about how we get those ideas into practice as quickly as we can, really, and start to build up that interest and momentum in the younger generation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we've been thinking a lot about those issues of talking to young people and finding out what works for them, and then also breaking that down and saying youth may be an underrepresented group, but there are also others, and there are smaller, there are subgroups and intersectional issues even among young people, and we can't reach everyone with the same broad approach. So I think we're getting somewhere. I mean, we as a youth advisory panel are only 10 people, and we represent some groups, but we're still reaching out to other people and building a network of youth representatives around the country to try and tap into more existing connections and reach more young people who want to get involved in BTO's work. Andy, have you got any thoughts based on your interactions with us as a youth advisory panel for the last calendar year and any of your other work with BTO?
Yes, thanks, Greg. This is such an important area, and I really echo what Juliet's already said in response to your question. When we've been working with the young people, we've learnt two very important things, I think, about our ability to engage a wider audience of different communities as well as young people. The first thing is about role models. If people like you, Greg, don't see yourselves in the community of birdwatching and science, and see that there are people like you who are able to influence what organisations are doing, then I guess it's very difficult for you to maintain momentum or indeed engage with the whole issue. And when we've been working with the Youth Advisory Panel and our youth representatives that are going to be helping us regionally, we've really learnt about that, and you are actual role models for other people to engage with us. And then the second thing, and this works as well more widely with equality, diversity and inclusion, we've noticed that it's really important to listen to the real experiences of those individuals. And with equality, we have a equality and diversity working group at the BTO, chaired by Jamie Redway, one of our young members of staff. She did an opinion piece in BTO News, and one of the kind of disturbing things is that attracts dissent from social media and people that kind of don't understand. And what we really feel is important is by recognising the real experiences of people like Jamie, growing up as a woman of colour in this sector. That's a powerful thing for us to learn from. And we push back on those people that come to us and say, this isn't important, it's not what BTO should be doing. We really think that those two things, role models that people can relate to in the sector, and listening to those valuable feelings and experiences of people as they've grown up in an underrepresented group, are the most important things that we do to enable us to do better in this space.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think one of the most important things is the listening, and how easy it is to listen for a short while and then think you know everything. And you just have to remember that even as you begin to put things in place to try and tackle some of those issues, you still need to be listening as how they are responded to, and who's not being reached by them.
Yeah, and you know, for a leader, for myself as the leader of BTO, it's kind of quite scary to let the Youth Advisory Panel loose with our trustees. But what an exciting and, you know, wonderful thing it was to see that happen, and to know that you guys are going to teach us things that we didn't know before and are going to help us move forward. And I think the trustee response when you came to the board with your ideas, and you're coming to the board again with a strategy in December, you know, that's a very exciting thing to see.
Great. I just wanted to pick up, Juliet, on something you mentioned earlier, actually, which is that idea of the generational divide. And Andy mentioned about how people often don't get involved in things like birding or science because they don't see someone like themselves. And how do you think we can tackle that divide? Because there is a risk, obviously, that we end up with lots of very young people and lots of older people who don't talk to each other, particularly if they're volunteers and they spend their own time, on BTO activities.
Yes, that's a very good question too. I think some of it is about, again, breaking down barriers. And we often think it's a one-way thing, but it's both, isn't it? I mean, many of us, I would say, including myself, you know, there are ways in which the next generation communicates and engages, which is very new to me and not second nature. I need to learn about those. But perhaps also the reverse is true. There are many of the sort of the older field skills, perhaps, the knowledge that comes from years of being out in the field and knowing your patch, if you like, that we can teach younger ornithologists. And it's finding ways in which you can bring them together. I mean, they don't really exist, I don't think, at the moment. So many of us would have learnt from our parents or an older relative, perhaps. And how much of that happens now, I'm not sure. But I think it's just trying to find ways to bridge that divide in both directions. And, younger people are quite scary for older people too, actually. and it's about just finding ways to communicate better and recognise there are differences. And we can learn from each other in both directions.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think hopefully some of the work we're doing with youths in areas around the country will help start building those connections, at the very least to make sure we don't lose the knowledge of those older members who have a lot to pass on and maybe don't have anyone to pass on to at the moment. Let's finish with a slightly more light-hearted question. I'll put you both on the spot. You've had a little bit of time to think about this, so no excuses. Andy first. If you could be one bird, what would you be and why?
Okay, this is really tricky, Greg. Come on, it's a tough one. The toughest question of the podcast, I think. So yeah, I've thought about this, and there are a number of species of bird that I think would be quite fun to be. And what I've alighted on is that I'd like to be a dotterel. So for those of you out there that don't know what a dotterel is, it's a wading bird, first of all, a shorebird essentially, and they're my favourite group of birds. And dotterels are very interesting. So they breed in the north of the world. There's a few in the highest reaches of the Cairngorms in Scotland and our highest mountains in the UK. But predominantly they breed in Scandinavia, up on the tundra. And I kind of really like birding in that part of the world. I like being in that part of the world for part of the year. But of course, they're great travellers too. And when they migrate, they go down to Southern Europe and North Africa. I've seen dotterel in the winter on the Canary Islands. So, they like a bit of sun too. And I like that as well. And then one of the most interesting things about dotterel, and, this might be a bit of a cliche to say it, but they have reversed gender roles. So females choose their male mate, they're mated, the females lay the eggs, then they shoot off and maybe go off with another male, leaving the original male to incubate the eggs and look after the young. And what I like about that is there's a message in there that, we need some gender equality around the birding world. And I would be a dotterel because I could carry on kind of making the case for that, really.
Great. I'm glad you thought so much into it. I'll let everyone listening decide, read into that more. Juliet, what about you? What bird would you be and why?
Well, I really loved thinking about this question because, of course, there are so many wonderful birds living in wonderful places. I've already said, of course, my favourite bird will forever be the dipper. But, of course, dippers are constrained to life on a fairly short stretch of rushing water, and that might not suit me too well. So I think in the end, the bird I came down on wishing I could be would be a swift. And, of course, swifts are supremely adapted to life on the wing. Some of them spend 10 months of 12 months of the year in flight, feeding on the wing, of course, but also mating and sleeping on the wing. They travel to wonderful places. So every year south to the African continent. And we know from tracking data, much of it BTO data, that they'll head down the west coast of the African continent and then across to the east before returning. And of course, when you see parties of screaming swifts here in the UK, they just look like they're having fun. So I think on all those counts, a swift would be the bird I'd like to be.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Sorry for putting you on the spot with such an evil question. I think we will leave today's interview there. So all that remains is for me to thank you both for spending some time with us. Andy, do you want to say goodbye yourself?
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Greg. It's been really enjoyable experience, and it just increases the excitement I have for the fact that Juliet is going to be leading the BTO to new and greater things.
No pressure, Juliet. Do you want to say anything before we go?
So, as I've said, obviously, I'm hugely excited about the future, but it's perhaps also worth just acknowledging that I recognise it's also quite a challenging time for many organisations, and particularly environmental conservation charities. It's a tough time. There will be challenges. I recognise that there will be challenges, but frankly, I'm just enormously excited about taking them on.
Yeah, it's great to have you on board. Well, thank you both for taking the time to talk to us today. That's been a really interesting insight to the two of you and the future of the BTO. Thanks to everyone at home for listening. And if you want to find out more about Juliet, Andy, the BTO, or the work of the Youth Advisory Panel, you can visit the BTO website, bto.org, or follow the BTO on social media and read the BTO blog.